First of all, I'm Joan Nake, Dean of Humanities, Social Science, and Sciences in Education at the Germantown campus, and I want to welcome you to the Montgomery College Germantown campus. Somebody had said recently that unlike Rockville, which has many, many activities, the Germantown campus in some ways lacks soul or spirit. And I'm really thrilled that the Peace and Justice Committee and community is adding soul and spirit to our campus by having activities like this. It's very exciting. And I really want to express my appreciation to Beverly Spencer, to Bill Soderberg, to Marta Lautz, who has often given her artistic talents to the Peace and Justice community, and to Sandra Maley, who's going to be introducing our speaker tonight. And I would also like to say, I think as thoughtful educators and students, we must be concerned about human rights. I'm particularly interested in tonight's events, human rights and the criminal justice system, because in a little tiny way, I hope that I help. Twice a year, I facilitate a book club for women in the maximum security prison for women in Jessup, Maryland. And it is an amazing experience. These women are bright, they are articulate, and in some ways they've done one thing, out of passion or whatever, and now they're locked up for life. And it seems to me that there are some aspects of that that are not appropriate or correct or just. I also work with the judge in that program, and she has established a community college degree for these women. So I'm very, very excited about that. And I happened to pick up this picture for today, for Human Rights Day. And I don't know whether you can all see it, but it's a butterfly and hands with chains around the hands. So hopefully tonight, when your discussion, you're going to be talking about perhaps the freedom that a butterfly will give to people who are enchained and imprisoned. So without further ado, I would like to pass the microphone to Beverly, who has spearheaded this activity, and she is going to be talking a little bit more about the event.
Okay, thank you so much, Dean Nake. We really appreciate your support of this activity. What I'd like us to do, if we could, is pass around copies of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm not sure that we have enough for everybody, but let's pass it, and if there aren't, then maybe start sharing so that every two people have a copy. And what I'd like us to do is I will read through the preamble, and then we are going to have the articles. There are articles of human rights, and one of the things that has happened, this is the 63rd anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights, December the 10th, and these basic articles of human rights are being used by the United Nations for the Millennium Development Goals, to look and see how can we create a peaceful world, how can we help people be more free, and what are the things that we need to do to be sure that more people have access and live so that they appreciate these human rights. The preamble states, I will read through this, and then what I'd like us to do is start if you're going to be able to still be here?
I will
okay, then we'll start with Sandra and go around, and if each person could read one of the articles, and we'll just keep going through the articles so that we have an idea of what this foundation of human rights is all about. The preamble states that whereas the recognition of inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations. Whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Whereas a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance for the full realization of this pledge, now therefore the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all people and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the peoples of member states themselves and among the peoples of territories under their jurisdiction. And you have to realize that this was crafted shortly after World War II. The people who came together as representatives of the different countries from around the world wanted to be sure that nothing like that ever happened again. Well, it's 63 years later. We still have atrocities and human rights issues and violations, but if we can keep these articles in mind, I think as we read through these, and I want each one of you to have a voice, so let's just go around now. And I will start with Article 1, and if you can read Article 2, 3, 4, and we'll just go around. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood.
Everyone is entitled of all rights and freedom set forth in this declaration without...
Oh, yes, you need the mic. Sorry. Okay, started with,
Sure.
say Article 2.
Article 2. Everyone is entitled of all the right and freedom set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion or national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty.
Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person.
Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms.
Article 5. No one shall be subjected or to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment.
Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law.
Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination.
Article 8. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by law.
Article 9. No one should be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile.
Article 10. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against them.
Article 11. Everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law in public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defense. Number 2, no one shall be held guilty of any penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it was committed, nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the penal offense was committed.
Article 12. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to protect the law against such interference or attacks.
Article 13. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. 2, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country.
Article 14. Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. 2, this right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions genuinely arising from non-political crimes or from acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Article 15, everyone has the right to a nationality. Number 2, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality.
Article 16. 1. Man or woman of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion have the right to marry and found a family. They are entitled to equal right as to marriage, during marriage, and as its dissolution. 2. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state.
Article 17. 1, everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. 2, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of this property.
Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought. Conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, or observance.
Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers.
Article 20, everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and 2, no one may be compelled to belong to an association.
Article 21, everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representative. Number 2, everyone has the right to equal access to public service in his country. Number 3, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures.
Article 22. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to Social Security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation, and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality.
Article 23. 1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. 2. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. 3. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. 4. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interest.
Article 24. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay.
Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the rights to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Number 2, motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, should enjoy the same social protection.
Article 26, number 1, everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Number 2, education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial and religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children.
Shall I wear this? Shall I use it? Article 27. 1. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. 2. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author.
Article 28. Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized.
Article 29. Number 1, everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. Number 2, in the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. Number 3, these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Article 30. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth within.
Thank you very much. And I just want you to remember that these human rights, this declaration was created and crafted in 1948, shortly after World War II. And yet, as we read through them, they're every bit as timely and relevant to what we're doing today. And I now turn it over to Sandra Maley to introduce our speaker and to give us a little more insight into the Declaration of Human Rights.
Hi, I'm Sandra Maley. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that Ashley Nellis has agreed to join us. I know Ashley as a friend. I actually don't know her work. I know a little bit about what she does, and I was thinking, I've not heard this read out loud like this all the way around. It's interesting to hear. And I was thinking these are high-flown words and great ideals. It's a tall order, but we need people working like Ashley does every day on the job to try to bring some of them into reality. And that's what she does. And if she's as good a worker as she is a friend, I know she does a good job at it. She works for the Sentencing Project, and she'll tell us more about the Sentencing Project. They're a leading organization that does research and advocacy for juvenile justice issues. She primarily works with the juvenile lifers, and I think you may be one of the country's experts on that. And also she works with the idea of the disparity in sentencing between minorities and non-minority peoples. And it's funny, the other night I was at Politics and Prose, and I heard Dr. Henry Louis Gates talk about his new book, The African American Historian, probably one of the most influential African Americans in this country, talk at Politics and Prose, and when he said about the disparity in the justice system, the crowd broke into applause, that we need to do something about that. And I go to Politics and Prose a lot and listen to these people. The crowd doesn't usually, break into spontaneous applause. So I thought you'd be glad to hear that. She also actually has her master's and PhD in criminal justice from American University. And you could tell she cut her hair from the picture that's on here. She cut her hair, and she's going to talk to us tonight about crime and punishment in America. And I frankly don't know a lot about what she does, so I'm looking forward to hearing it. And Mark Miller printed this out for me. He's the librarian at the Tacoma Park Library. And you have a small picture here, and Mark does a nice brochure, really nicely done. But I wanted to bring a bigger one, and Mark actually had a big poster we used to put up, but he had thrown it away, I guess, over the years where it got misplaced. But I love that picture of Eleanor Roosevelt holding up the Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. The actual day is December 10th, so we're not far off of the day. It'll be, 63 years later. And here's a nice little, Mark printed this out for me in a color version of the Declaration. And when we did the 60th anniversary a few years ago, I didn't realize I'd been working with the peace and justice community for more than 3 years now. But we had these really nice little brochures printed out and we handed them out to students. So I'm glad we got to read it, and I'm glad Ashley's here to talk to us, and I turn it over to her.
Thank you. So this is on the, okay, great. Well, I'm Ashley Nellis. I have this on my, and I'm a researcher with the Sentencing Project, and we're in Washington, D.C., and we've been around since the mid-1980s. We started as an organization that provided technical assistance to states that were working on sentencing reforms, implementing sentencing guidelines, and trying to provide some more structure so that there was less bias in the sentencing system. We have a number of areas of priority at the Sentencing Project. We focus on juvenile justice issues and criminal justice. For many years, we only focused on criminal justice issues, and as you might guess, there are quite a few that need reform. In particular, we focus a lot on what are sort of collectively called collateral consequences of a criminal conviction. So someone who probably hasn't been involved in a crime or gone to jail or prison might not know that when you go to jail, when you go to prison, when you even get arrested now, that's a lifelong consequence that you take with you. Many times, college admissions, they used to ask if you have a criminal conviction. Now they ask if you've been arrested, more and more. And so that can weed people out right away, even if they actually never were convicted. We also do a lot of work on people coming out of prison and trying to get a job, trying to get a house, trying to vote, or trying to live in a particular community that face a number of barriers. When somebody comes out of jail or prison, they lose the right to vote in federal elections. So in the coming year, this next presidential election, 5 million people with a felony conviction will not be able to vote. And we work hard on trying to change that law. We feel strongly that, like the tone of the Declaration, once you've paid your debt to society, you have the right and the obligation to participate in that society. And it's quite ironic, some of the added sanctions that we have in our criminal justice system today, because people who do engage in civic participation, people who vote and who get involved in their community and everything, are actually less likely to engage in crime. So to bar people from engaging in the civic process is actually counterproductive. We also work on issues related to public housing. So many people with a drug conviction are banned from living in public housing. Many people with a drug conviction are also poor and need to live in public housing. It's also true in some states that if you have a drug conviction, you can't visit public housing. So if you yourself have a drug conviction, you've served your time, your grandmother lives in public housing, if you go visit your grandmother and you're caught, she can get evicted. So we work on issues related to that seem, in our mind, to be quite nonsensical. And we also work on issues around something that became a big national issue in the last year, the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentencing. For almost 25 years, there was a disparity of 100 to 1 in terms of the length of a sentence someone would get for possession of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And the issue with that is that they're the same exact thing. Powder cocaine and crack cocaine are the exact same chemical. They're produced differently and they're marketed to different populations. And scores of African Americans have gone to prison and jail because of possession or sales of crack. Whereas powder cocaine possessors or sellers are more likely to get a chance at rehab or a shorter stint in jail and prison. So just last year, after 25 years of this disparate law, we actually were successful in getting Congress to acknowledge that there was a disparity, and they reduced it, not to 1-to-1, unfortunately. Sort of at the last minute, they reduced it to 18-to-1. So there's still a disparity between crack and powder cocaine in terms of the sentencing, but it's less than it used to be. And as a result, over 10,000 people are going to get a reduced sentence. So it's made a huge impact. Part of sentencing like that came around in the late 80s and 90s, around the time that crack entered the market here in the United States, filled our prisons with people who had drug problems, people who really had that really needed a public health response to them, but actually were suffering from an addiction and may have engaged in crimes to support that addiction. Now, today, in our federal prisons, 50% of the people who are in federal prison are there for a drug offense. Nothing violent, nothing related to anything other than drug-related crime. So we work toward getting our prisons back in balance. When we look at internationally, we are not just slightly off the mark in terms of the rest of the world. We are way off the mark. We have the highest incarceration by far compared to the rest of the nation, and it has soared in the past 30 years because of the war on drugs principally. And because of another issue that I work most closely on, which is people serving life sentences. So that's something that's also unique to the United States. We are the only country in the world that practices giving life without parole sentences to people who committed their crime before they turned 18 years old. And we have not just a few of them, we have over 2,600. And they're housed all over the country, and about 31 states have at least one person serving juvenile life without parole. And most of them, 65% of them, are housed in just 5 states. And those states are historically the most punitive states in our nation. Michigan, Florida, Pennsylvania, California, and Louisiana. Pennsylvania actually leads the nation and leads the world in terms of giving young people life without parole. And some people, because we've heard the terms life sentence, so much in the media and everything, there's this common assumption that a life sentence means really you're just going to have like a 7 or a 10-year sentence and then you could get out. If you behave yourself, maybe there's good time or something like that. There are life sentences that do have parole. There's about 140,000 people nationally serving those. But the issue we work on is life sentences without parole. The people that are serving the sentence will never see a parole board. They will never get to have their case reconsidered, even if they went in as young as 13 years old, and some of them did. So this is a small pocket of our prison population. It's probably less than 3% of the prison population comprises this group of lifers without parole who were young. But it's gaining in a lot of areas because it so specifically violates international law. And we have become really the only country that uses this practice. There's no other country in the world that does juvenile life without parole that we're aware of. And it's in direct violation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So it makes you wonder, how did we get like this? Here we are, we're America, we're supposed to be the leader in so many ways, and there are so many barbaric things that we don't do. So how did it come to be that we have this black mark on our moral fabric, so to speak? And the reason that this really sort of took off is actually what some people have called a statutory accident. In the 80s and the 90s, as I know some people here are criminal justice people, you probably know that there was a significant uptick in crime, especially youth violence. And that's largely because, like I mentioned, the crack epidemic and also the influx of illegal handguns. The combination of those two made it very attractive to put young people on the streets to do the wheelings and the dealings. It was also believed that young people would get lesser sentences. And what happened was that in the early 90s, most states, nearly every state, adopted legislation that allowed youth to be tried as adults, so transferred into the adult system before they turned 18. And that was, sort of reined in by statements that we heard in the media a lot, like you do the crime, you do the time, adult crime, adult time, things like that. That sounded snazzy, but in fact were terrible ideas for public safety and for youth. Nevertheless, we went forward with it, and by the mid-90s, every state in the nation allowed children to be tried in the adult system. And the issue with that, among the obvious issues, is that once you're put into the adult system as a young person, they cannot acknowledge your young age anymore. That's part of why you go into the adult system. The fact that you were 15 or 16 cannot be entered into any court materials. And because it wouldn't be for an adult, you would never argue, well, this person was only 27. And in addition to that, young people were susceptible then to adult sanctions, including life without parole. There is no life without parole in the juvenile system. In the juvenile system, typically someone would spend, they could spend up to their 21st birthday in a juvenile facility. So maybe they go in at 13. They could be in there for a considerable period of time, especially if they committed a homicide. But that was seen as sort of not good enough. And as a result, youth were placed more and more into the adult system by the thousands. And once they were there, like I say, they were processed and then given sanctions, including life without parole. It's a huge departure. That whole era of the 80s and 90s is a huge departure from how we started out treating youth in this country, youth who break the law. We had, when the country started, we had no juvenile justice system. And the juvenile justice system was created in 1899 in Chicago with the establishment of a juvenile court. And it was established with the belief that children are different, and children need to be given a special chance to reform their lives, and they should not be, inflicted with this stigma of a criminal conviction because they have so much of their life ahead of them. And there was very much of a belief that we could rehabilitate people. And so there was a lot of loyalty to the juvenile justice system. So the fact that we ended up abandoning the juvenile justice system in the 80s and 90s is a huge departure from our beliefs about who youth are and what they're capable of. And in the international context, it's very much out of step. We have, basically shamed ourselves into this position, and even as recently as the last 5 years, in some Supreme Court cases that I'll talk about in a second, we have been called out by our own Supreme Court justices as being completely out of step with the rest of the world. So I want to talk a little bit about this issue of juvenile life without parole and how it's making its way. The sort of one beacon of hope in this is that it's gotten the attention of our United States Supreme Court. And it starts really with a case in 2005, which was called Roper v. Simmons. And that was the case of a 17-year-old boy, Christopher Simmons, who was charged with a homicide and convicted and given the death penalty. And his case was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And Kennedy and the other justices agreed that because of a youth's young age and reduced culpability, they were unable to appreciate the consequences of their actions like an adult could. And they used reasoning provided to them by the American Medical Association and the APA that showed that juvenile adolescent brains are literally underdeveloped in a very important area, in the area of responsibility and being able to appreciate consequences. That's why teenagers act the way they do, because they're actually underdeveloped in that way. The brain does not develop completely until the age of 24. And so the court basically agreed that a juvenile who even does as serious a crime as a homicide is unable to fully appreciate the consequences of their action and cannot be given the ultimate punishment in the United States, which is the death penalty. And there too, we actually stand quite unique. We're one of the few nations in the world that subjects people to the death penalty. And we were at that time the only nation that subjected children to it. So in 2005, we got rid of the death penalty for kids. And then in 2009, the court again looked at the next sort of level of punishment, which was life without parole for juveniles. And it took up two more cases, the case of Joe Sullivan and the case of Terrence Graham, both of whom are from Florida. They're separate cases. I'll tell you that Joe Sullivan was 13 years old at the time of his crime. Neither of them was a homicide. The Sullivan's was a sexual assault, and he's in his 30s now. He has MS. He's confined to a wheelchair. And his case went up to the Supreme Court, and so did Terrence Graham's, who actually, Terrence got juvenile life without parole for actually violating his probation. He had done an armed burglary when he was 16. The judge said, I'm going to give you a pass on this. I could give you as much as a life sentence, because this was Florida, which is one of the most punitive states. I could give you a life sentence. I'm not going to. You need to behave yourself. Terrence didn't behave himself. He did another armed burglary, and he was given a life sentence for violating his probation, because you're not allowed to commit burglaries on your probation. Both of those cases ended up in the Supreme Court again. And Kennedy, who wrote the opinion, and the other justices again looked to the medical science and said, once again, that people under the age of 18 are unable to appreciate the consequences of their actions, especially when they don't kill or intend to kill. And so in the next year, 2010, when they gave their opinion, they said that unless somebody had killed or intended to kill, they could not be given juvenile life without parole. So that led to the resentencing of about 150 people. And now remember, there's over 2,600 serving life. The rest of them are there for some kind of homicide. Either they themselves killed somebody or they were there during a homicide. And I'll tell you, most of those 150 are still in prison, including Terrence Graham and Joe Sullivan. Terrence Graham has not even been resentenced yet. So one would think that, you know, when the Supreme Court says you can't do this anymore, that the states would just hop to and not do it, but they're very resistant. And some of my colleagues have the opinion that for Florida in particular, they're still very angry about the Bush v. Gore in the Supreme Court case that ended up there. And they're still very angry that the Supreme Court told Florida what to do back in 2000, and so they're 2008, and so they're reluctant to do anything that the Supreme Court tells them to do. So Florida actually has the most juvenile lifers serving for non-homicide and has hardly resentenced any of them. But, you know, in time they will definitely have to. Some have been resentenced and have been given, unfortunately, very long sentences. So you can get a sentence that isn't life without parole, but that is 200 years long. And some of them have received those sentences, which are now, of course, going back for appeal. So it's an extremely long process. The third case I just wanted to mention is actually upcoming. The Supreme Court just granted cert a month ago on 2 more cases of juveniles serving life without parole. The one is Evan Miller, and he's in Alabama. He was 14 at the time of his crime, and his crime was a robbery that included an arson in which somebody died later. So he was charged with a mandatory life without parole for homicide at the age of 14. The other boy is Mr. Jackson, and he's in Arkansas. And he was given life without parole, also at 14, for being there at the time of a homicide, though he was not the person who committed it. He was what's known as the getaway driver. But many states in our country have laws that are called collectively sort of the hands of one, hands of all law. So if you were there for the crime, maybe the 3 of you decide to go rob a gas station, 2 of you go inside to rob the gas station, things get out of hand, somebody gets shot, all 3 of you get life without parole. Even if you were just the person in the car, you had no idea, you wouldn't necessarily even have to know that they were going to rob a gas station. So that's the other issue that the court is dealing with is whether somebody has to have been the person who pulled the trigger. So in the spring, in February actually, the court's going to hear again these cases, and they're going to address whether it is constitutional to give somebody who's 14 years old life without parole, whether it's constitutional to give somebody life without parole if it was mandatory, which is the case for both of these. It's what's called a mandatory minimum that cannot give acknowledgement of someone's young age. It doesn't matter how old they were or what was going on in their life, they have to get life without parole, and the judge's hands are tied. And the court will also decide if life without parole is acceptable if in the case where someone was there for a homicide, but did not act as the principal actor and may not have even known that a homicide was going to take place. So, you know, we're hopeful. We do, at the Sentencing Project, we do a fair amount of work on the cases sort of in a behind-the-scenes way. We provided a fair amount of research to the court for the 2009 cases. They needed to know basically how many non-homicides there were around the country, and that information wasn't known at that time. Now they need to know how many of the people are there under a mandatory statute, how many people are there under what's called felony murder, so that they can make a decision about, whether this is an Eighth Amendment violation, because the crux of the issue rests on whether it's sufficiently rare. If it's sufficiently rare, then of course it violates the Eighth Amendment. But they have to know how many people are actually serving the sentence in order to do that. And the court will always defer to the states to see if this is a practice the states are using, then they can't say really that they're less inclined to make a decision that would change so many states' laws. So, it's a kind of an exciting time. This could affect many of the people serving juvenile life. It's believed that as many as a third are there for having been basically at the wrong place at the wrong time. And we know that kids are more inclined to, number one, go along with the bad ideas of their friends, and number two, to act in groups. So it's more likely that several of them went down together than for older offenders. So that's the the bulk of the work that I do. I do know many of the juvenile lifers. I can tell you a little bit about them as a class. I just finished doing a national study of the juvenile lifers and interviewed them via survey. Heard from about 1,500 of them, almost 1,600 of them. So almost 70% of them participated in the study. And as you might guess, the racial disparities are pretty extreme. Only 25% of people that are serving juvenile life without parole are white. 75% are people of color. On average, they were 16 years old at the time of their offense. They usually did not have any prior adult convictions, though they had trouble with the law in terms of truancy and dropping out of school or having been expelled, shoplifting, smaller things like that. Very few of them had an adult conviction. And most of them are men. About 98% are men. There's only about 75 women juvenile lifers, and they're by and large they're in their 30s now. They're mid-30s, so not too far off from the ages around in this room. But there are people there who have been there so long that they're actually in their mid-70s now. And just sort of patiently waiting for the law to rule in their favor. The notion that these folks in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there are many of them who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, would be a public safety threat is pretty preposterous. The first reason is that murder is an extremely rare event. People who commit homicide are very unlikely to commit another homicide, and that doesn't sell well because there's other reasons why we put people in prison than just to keep them from committing another crime. But their public safety concerns are very minimal, and yet it costs almost $2 million for each person to keep them in prison for the rest of their lives when you put them there when they're 16. So you would think that we could possibly invest $2 million in diverting them from a life of crime and have saved a whole lot of heartache and prison beds. So I think I'll just leave it there and let the last 10 minutes or so open up for questions or anything that you